Welcome back to Very True. I'm Alex, and today I'm sitting down with my friend Ibrahim, VP of Finance and Operations at Descript, who I think is quietly one of the most interesting financial operators in the game right now. Here's why. Ibrahim has essentially rebuilt his entire workflow around AI, not as a gimmick, not as a party trick, but as a genuine operating system. We're talking about email triage, SQL queries, contract red lines, procurement approvals, all running out of a terminal and Claude code. No developers required. But what makes this conversation worth your time isn't the tools. It's the mindset shift underneath them and the intelligent process design to integrate AI into critical operating workflows. When you remove every bottleneck from a great operator, something interesting happens. They don't relax, they go deeper. We talk about what finance actually is, what gets unlocked when you stop treading water, and where all this is heading. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Very True podcast. I'm Alex Oppenheimer, the founder of Verissimo Ventures, an early-stage venture fund investing in Israel and the US. Previously, I was a tech banker at Morgan Stanley and a VC investor at NEA. I then spent several years working directly with startups on finance, business models, RevOps, and more, before launching Verissimo Ventures in 2020. I got into this business because I enjoy working with founders and helping them realize their vision and fulfill their potential. I created this podcast to shine a light on the day-to-day reality that most people are too afraid to discuss. The pivots, the fumbles, and the so-called non-core aspects of building a business from scratch. Rather than focusing on the end of a successful road, we spend time here discussing the tougher, lesser-known parts of the startup lifecycle. The goal is to offer insights to founders to improve their startup experience, whether that means avoiding problems and finding success faster, or just feeling more confident and less isolated on their entrepreneurial journey. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Very True. Today, I am really excited to have my friend Ibrahim on the podcast. He is currently the VP of Finance at Descript and is deep in the AI space right now as a financial operator, but also has spent a lot of time thinking and operating on how best to use AI tools in that finance seat. This is something that I've personally been waiting for a long time. I am the son of a CFO who's in his late 60s now. I have been a strategic finance consultant for a long time. I've seen the operational mess that happens inside companies, and I've been waiting for what I call the next generation of financial operators who, instead of playing whack-a-mole, can be more thoughtful about how to use modern tools to solve really old problems. And we could talk about the history of that a little bit more. Ibrahim and I met, we were actually both kind of consulting in a different finance capacities for the same company, I think back in like 2018 or 19. And we've stayed in touch. I think we've actually met once in person, and it was in Paris a few years ago.
Paris, yeah.
And, he's in now my hometown, and I'm in Jerusalem, which is my new hometown. And I'm excited to have him on today and to share this discussion with everyone. So I will kick it over to Ibrahim to share a little bit more of his background, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. Thank you, Alex. Happy to share a little bit about my background. As you said, I lead finance and operations at Descript. And Descript is an AI video editing tool. And as you may know, at a startup, doing finance and operations means a lot of things. And so at Descript, I lead the finance and operation team. So meaning that the finance team, the accounting team, I'm also owning RevOps, something that's slightly different than a lot of finance operators. I also oversee our customer support team, and I'm fairly involved in internal tooling or IT also as well. Funny enough, like I wear a lot of hats at the company. Last year, I was our interim head of sales and success for like a year until we hired a VP of sales for obviously great reasons. But yeah, so a little bit about my background. From Paris, started my career at a fairly large retail marketing firm where I was part of the international team. So my job at the time was to kind of travel across Europe, work with a ton of different subsidiaries. And when a head of finance was MIA, they would just send me and I would have to handle that subsidiary. So I've done that for a couple of years. I loved it. And then I decided to move to the US. I moved to San Francisco, where I was, head of finance and ops at a small kind of SaaS company. The finance, accounting. I was also head of people there, a small startup. I've done that for a couple of years. Then I moved to consulting work, where I met you, where I worked with a ton of like B2B SaaS companies. And there, like I've done a ton of things, wearing multiple hats, a lot of modeling. I think that's kind of where we overlapped a little bit. A fair amount of fundraising, working with a lot of head of sales, implementing a lot of data stacks, controllership activities, and all of these things. And so, yeah, I was doing a little bit of consulting work for this company, Descript, and I happened to join them full time a year later. So that's kind of my journey into to the company.
And we have to admit, we're recording this on Riverside. We're not on Descript, but I think
Not yet, not yet.
maybe one day we'll graduate to the real enterprise tour, make this happen. So that's very cool. And really one of the things that it makes me think about that you've worn all these different hats is, and I just posted on LinkedIn about this, about how we just use this jargon and the term that it's like finance. And I still remember when I stepped in to meet the founders of Monday.com and they're like, what do you do? Like, we've never met anyone who does what you do. And I was like, it's called finance. Like, well, we have a finance guy. I'm like, let me guess, he worked at EY or PwC before? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, he's probably an accountant or an auditor, and they're like, huh, like, what's the difference? And the way I acutely define it is like, I have this line, which I say, which is that if you're a creative financier, you become a billionaire. And if you're a creative accountant, you go to jail. And that ethos completely changes the way you view the world. And the other thing is, one's backwards looking, one's forwards looking. And especially in startup land, you want things to be geometric, not arithmetic. And again, you need to understand not how to make sure things check out, but how calculus can drive businesses.
Yeah.
So it's a very different philosophy. And I found that there's very few people that understand both well enough to actually be useful. And again, I'm the son of a CFO and I've watched my dad try to figure this out and how, he became effectively, like you're saying, a really good manager. Like my dad was the CFO of Planet Labs and he became the head of launch. Like he flew to India for like 36 hours once to manage an actual launch. Now, my dad worked in aerospace and is a trained mechanical engineer, so it wasn't like so insane, but like still, he's the CFO of the company. And like, that's what happens. And it actually gets to another idea, which is, people have been talking about how like data is the new oil. And I still remember when the term big data was invented back in like 2012. And I'm pretty sure we I don't want to say we invented it at Morgan Stanley, but we really popularized it. And it was for the Splunk IPO.
Mm-hmm.
So Splunk does logs, right? Which logs are just the accumulation of data and it's very raw. And I still remember, visiting a very elite cybersecurity team and like they just had Splunk logs like flowing on their big screens. But anyway, like people talk about like data's the new oil. And I'm like, yeah, if you want to just sell stuff online, then like, I guess data's oil. But I came up with this other thing and it's tied to like my recent kind of health binge, which is that like data is actually blood. And what blood does is it carries nutrients around our body and it's the circulatory system. And as a result, you can take a prick of your finger or from your arm and with a very small sample, you can actually learn a tremendous amount about what's going on in the organism. And to me, like that's what data is. And the original form of company data is financial data. Like that's what companies run on.
Yep.
So the term I started using instead of finance is quantitative resource allocation. And so I know that we're kindred spirits in this, but I'd love to hear your take on like how, I don't know, whatever you're thinking, like on this idea and like how this has developed and how we should be looking at what financial data and real all company operational data
for sure.
represents.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I'm pretty data minded as a finance operator, especially since working at Descript. I would say, I think the old way to look at it was for me to mostly focus on like just pure financial data. And so financial data is like, okay, what is my revenue? What is my COGS? I want to check my OPEX, and then I can just work on the cash forecast and, your runway and all of these. So these are like obviously table stakes and you need to have that information. But I would say a lot more finance operators are going to work across the entire data stack. And the entire data stack is the amount of instrumentation, especially at the top line level, is tremendous now. So we have a ton of data tables around traffic data, conversion data, signups data. We have a massive amount of segmentation of our AR metrics that we track on a daily basis when we do some aggregating table on a monthly basis. And we have a lot of reporting around those, especially when you work at a high scale or high volume environment. Data is definitely key. And I would say data is a big part of like how a finance person has to operate within the company. And then the goal for me is how can I glean all of because then there is also like a ton of data. Sometimes there's even too much data. And then the question is, how do you glean the key insight at the company so that you can just overall like improve the business model of your business, right? You want to help operators at your company to make better decisions. You want to challenge existing operating practices. And so I've been really like spending a lot of time on data over the years, especially early at Descript. I'm a little bit biased where like also for my strategic finance team, I tend to really hire people that have data backgrounds. And I feel like, having that mindset, that approach makes you like just a better operator.
For sure. I think in this day and age, it's like you can go on vibes, you can go on instincts, but you need to actually then have the skill to back up those vibes and instincts with the data. But that brings me to another thing where, I fancy myself like a pretty hardcore finance guy, but I do these like pre-seed inception
Yeah.
stage investments. And people are like, I don't get it. Like, shouldn't you be doing like growth stage? And I'm like, well, I like the harder problem. Right. And I would say, like, let's solve a financial problem with our eyes closed and our hands tied behind our back. And people say, well, how do you build a model for a company when the company has no financials or no data? And I say, well, how do you know what data to collect if you don't know what model it's going to go into? And that gets people thinking. But that brings me to like a broader point, which is this interplay between structured data and unstructured data. And I'll give like a little bit of a hopefully accurate history lesson here, which is that the first ever software post the calculator, which is a piece of software, was basically accounting software, right? Like, because computers are really good at adding numbers, like really, really fast, and they're really accurate. So they're like, let's just add a bunch of numbers. And like, so there's been this interplay between, I'm not going to get into the whole thing, between like the regulatory angle and like what the tools are and how that defines the job. And it became like this vortex of things getting slower and slower and slower and further behind. But it was really good for structured data. Then it feels like over the last 20 years, we've been on this warpath of like structuring unstructured data. I mean, a great example of that would just be performance marketing. Go to John Hamm's character in Mad Men or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Tell them like one day everything's going to be data, and like you're going to have a Google Analytics dashboard and like a Meta dashboard, and you're just going to be able to measure everything and be like, that's not marketing. Like, that's nerdy computer science stuff. And you're going to be like, yeah, exactly. But that interplay between structured data and unstructured data, and being able to turn things that were historically unstructured into things that are structured. Like, humans are good at unstructured data. And that's, again, where a lot of the leaders and instincts and those amazing people and what they can do. But I feel like now, and this kind of gets into the main meat of our conversation, which is like, I think AI has, in a large way, from an operational perspective, allowed us to take unstructured data that is at the management layer, in language, in meetings, whatever it may be, with customers, and turn that into structured data on which we can apply much more objective, rigorous methods to get down to the truth, but at risk of kind of losing the thread or, missing the forest for the trees or whatever, where you can still totally mess up if you don't have some instinctual thing going on. So I guess as you think about like that interplay between structured and unstructured, again, if you've done sales, you've done customer success, you've lived this, not just numbers to numbers to numbers, but interactions to numbers. How do you think about that going forward now that the AI tools, especially just over the last 2 months, have like massively stepped up? And by the way, I have to plug this. I just got off a call with one of my best friends from high school, who is now an AI professor at a pretty elite university. And he told me last summer he switched to Gemini, and in December he switched back to Claude. And I'm like, okay. And I literally basically did the same thing today. Today's the day. It's like back from Gemini, back to Claude. Because before I was on Gemini, I was on Claude, OpenAI, Perplexity.
Yeah.
My 3 came out. Now it's like Claude, Sonnet, 4 or whatever. And then maybe we'll go back to whatever. Anyway, so I'll let you take it from there.
Sure. There's a couple interesting points about unstructured data and structured data. That's definitely something we're trying to work with on a daily basis, especially around, there's 2 areas where I spend some time on is obviously the sales and success part and the customer support part. And one of the challenge we have, and where we're spending a lot of time at the company, is how do we turn that unstructured data into structured data, right? So even last week, as I was speaking with the team, and I was like, hey, so we use a couple data points at the company and a couple tools, especially on the customer support side. So we have an AI chatbot that is interacting with all our customers. if you have, support tickets. And at the same time, we use Zendesk for, let's say, a different channel of tickets. Let's say if you reach out directly by email or something like that. So we have like two different channels. Data is fairly unstructured. And what we're looking to get is how can we move all these data to really structured BigQuery tables so that we have the details of the customer IDs, their plan, but also we want the context and the content of all these conversations. So that we can now all these kind of tribal knowledge that we had that were like sitting in like the head of CS or, some agents can just be fed into our data pipelines. Now, because we have, thanks to AI, we have a way to interpret that data at scale and then see trends in real time. You have metadata tagging that you can do automatically. So it's just one thing we're doing right now. Same thing for like sales calls, right? So obviously we use tools like Gong, or there's different tools out there to record all your sales conversations. You can also track the emails and all of that. The question is, how do you map all your customer journey into some sort of structured data table so that you can start asking, give me the type of customers that are expressing X amount of feedback or that specific type of feedback. And so that's kind of where I think the data team and my team are spending a lot of time on is like data infrastructure around this. Because I think what we're looking to do is really leverage insights at scale, because it's pretty easy now to just connect a specific data point and ask a specific question. But what we want to do is to really enable pretty much anyone in the company to interact with these tools and kind of glean insights from those. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of I would say now, like everything is data, and I'm thinking a lot more about this on every part of the business. I want our GL to be in a data set that I can query on SQL. I want to have access to all contracts in some sort of database so that I can create that, at scale through AI. Same thing for all invoices, like things like think that were just reserved for like data initially in the past. Like, okay, maybe my billing data, my customer like metrics. Now everything is data. And because now you have the tools to kind of start tapping into those and have high sense of interpretation. And so that's what we spend a lot of the time on.
Nice. And so I guess one of the key things, and I experienced this myself, like as some people know, I built like a whole Airtable operating system for my business over the last 6 years. It's if you go to thevcos.com, you can see really actually it's already a couple years old version of it. And to me, the value there is the structure, right? And the way that the pieces interact with each other, of understanding like, here's a fund product, here's an LP entity, here's people, here's a fund product that owns a holding in a company that is in a pipeline that is connected to meetings that is also connected to people and the companies, and like the overlay and like the layout of that, which was clear in my head of like how all these things interrelate to each other. And then I spent hundreds of hours mechanically tying them into each other. And so I just did something interesting with Claude. I still need to review what it dealt with, because I just put Claude into Excel today for the first time.
Okay.
Which is what I did was I always tell people back, like what I said is that great business models start in PowerPoint. They don't start in Excel. If you can't first clearly lay out, here's what we sell to who and how, we have an SDR and like, here's our process. Like, let's just walk through the process. And like at each point in that process, we can measure something. We can actually create the frameworks to build a rigorous process that will throw off the right data. And like, frankly, I did quite well helping people just do this, right? Like sit down with a founder and be like, break down your sales process for me. And then like, let's try to simplify it. Like we don't need different AEs for every channel when you're a small company. Like let's consolidate that into one A, for example. So I took one of my PowerPoint layouts, which again is let's clarify what we are trying to do as a business. And I took that PowerPoint layout and I put it into Claude and I told it what my kind of legend is of like what the different colors and shapes mean. And I said, turn this into a model. And I only had a few minutes to look at what it had done, but it's pretty good.
Yeah. It's
like,
impressive now.
Because again, like I feel like, okay, I did the heavy lifting. The other part is like pretty mechanical, right? And so as someone who is pretty ADHD, but loves Excel and structuring kind of like flows and stuff like that, to me, it's just an accelerator. And so I guess I'm interested in hearing how you think about like the necessity, I guess, in the future of understanding those frameworks, or to what extent you can just be like, here's everything that's going on. Let me just talk at you. And like the AI can like then distill that, create the PowerPoint, teach you the PowerPoint of the flowchart, and then build the Excel model to match it. Like, are we there yet? Is that what people should be doing? Like, do they even know that they need to be asking AI to do that? And that's the requisite steps to do something useful. This is where I'm still trying to figure out, like, where do humans fit into this?
Yeah,
And
for
like,
sure. It's super interesting. I was thinking a little bit about this last week about AI for modeling. So I use AI fairly extensively for all my workflows. I will say if there is one maybe workflow where I'm not using it as much is on the modeling side. Obviously, I think, when you're in finance for a while, you're a pretty advanced Excel user for most people. And you tend to start building fairly complex models. I is at a point where if you want to make a fairly targeted change, update, or creation of a model, it can do that fairly well. But if you have a fairly open-ended PowerPoint and you say, go create me a model, you may have to tweak that a ton, or you may come up with a fairly simplistic model that may not fit your point of view. I mean, it depends, especially if you're like on the seed stage, early stage, it's fine. But when you're like tens of millions of ARR, things like that, it start to be like, be maybe different. So I would say I still use it mostly as a co-pilot on the modeling side. One use case that I used fairly recently on the modeling side is, so let's on our self-serve model. So, you have two channels at Descript. You can buy through the sales team, or you can buy through self-serve. Most of our business comes from self-serve. And then, so we have a fairly extensive cohort-based modeling. And what I asked the model to do, and where I used to spend a bunch of time, is to translate all these kind of model inputs into daily targets for the team. So what it did, it went to go check historical data about, hey, here's kind of the impact of what's happening on a holiday, what's happening on the weekend. I listed all the kind of anticipated variation for 2026. I took all the inputs of data and do that translation automatically. And then we can start targeting that. So I think for that, it's like extremely useful. I think in terms of like the conceptualization, you still need to have a good sense. I would say you need to have a mental model of how your model is going to look like. Otherwise, you may grow a little bit frustrated, or you need a way to go into plan mode very, very extensively. You need to really tell him exactly what you need in plan mode to get exactly what you need. Like vague prompt for like non-finance experts is tricky. I think that's where like you really unlock a lot of value using AI is if you're like an expert in a domain and then you have AI, then that's kind of how you start. That's when you start like seeing like amazing leverage.
So I'll give two examples. The first was like 5 years ago, advising a company. The second is like 2 weeks ago with one of my portfolio companies.
Yeah.
So 5 years ago, I remember I was working with a marketplace company, and the COO wasn't really like a marketplace tech guy, whatever, very good guy. But he was like, I just want to know what one supply side person is worth, right? Like what's the LTV of like a supply side participant? And I was like, it depends, right? Like, like
it's always the answer in finance.
Right, like because
it always depends.
Marketplaces are about load balancing, right? And it's like I tried to explain to him that, like, hey, remember when Uber was offering like $5,000 for drivers? And the reason why was that if you don't have enough drivers, if people open the app and there's no drivers, they just close the app and then they don't open it again, and that is very, very expensive. And so it's all about load balancing. So you can't just isolate the value of a driver. And I've gone deep on like unit economics of a marketplace are really clever. And like, shout out to my friend Amit Mukherjee, who I worked with at NEA, who like was the first person to explain this to me of like, what are the unit economics of a marketplace and how to think about that from a load balancing perspective and the information that you need. I guess we maybe could ask the AI right now and see, but like, okay, I was able to explain to him that like he was not asking the right question. And like, I've definitely experienced that with an AI prompt where I ask it something and to what extent can it push back and be like, that's not really the right question. I could like tell you right now, but that's a point in time and this is the context that you need. So it's this broader trend of like meeting people where they're at. It's something I've been thinking about really for the last couple of days of like, can you meet someone where they're at? Like I was able to tell this guy, like, that's not really the right way to look at it, and like, because if you go out and acquire a bunch of those, but you don't have demand side to fulfill their supply, then like, it's not going to matter. And same the other way. So that's one example where like the question there is like, can the AI meet you halfway, right? Like, or not halfway, right? Like, let's say right now I can meet you halfway, but what feels halfway to us now might feel like only 5% of the way 6 months from now, where like he'll just ask like, what's it worth? Like he might not even have to ask what's it worth. He'll just be like, what should I do? Right? Like some super vague thing. And like it can capture the context it needs. Cause like that's really the key to prompting. Anyone who's used AI knows that like you've got to give it the information that you need. And I'm a data nerd. So like I have like my watch collection on an Airtable, my wine collection on an Airtable, my flights in a Google Doc. And that's only because I've been tracking them since before Airtable existed. I've got obviously my huge Airtable of how I run my business. I just put together like a gear closet Google sheet of like my bikes and my like running gear so that I can like ask AI, like, what should I wear? Which bike should I run? What tire pressure? Like, and it already knows all the context.
Mhm.
And I give it the information that it needs because it doesn't always know to ask. But I guess as you just think about it, and this is almost more like a philosophical question, at what point can it just, it'll know what to ask, right? Right now you have to tell it, like, if you're not sure, don't just infer, like, ask me to confirm. But like, where does it just get like smarter enough that it's just like, nah, I don't need you. Like, I got this. And it could pull its own context. So
Yeah.
it's an open-ended, like,
Yeah, it's an
philosophical
open.
point.
Yeah. I think it's definitely going to get there at some point. And the way I'm thinking about it right now is, I think the first example you mentioned is really good in the sense that for now, anything that doesn't require a high level of judgment could be deferred to AI at a very high level right now. No, there's no questions about this. So then your question is like the frontier question is, when is it going to have that judgment that we have right now through experience or through challenging status quo? Uh, I think it's going to probably. I have no idea, to be honest. Like it's $100 billion question, but I feel like we're going to get to a point where that is going to have a lot more like nuance and judgment. And I would say, yeah, I think it's hard for me to answer, but I
Yeah.
think it's probably coming. I think it's probably coming. Yeah, for sure.
It's hard to
Or
know
at
where
least
it's headed.
we'll be like really pleasantly surprised about the things to look at. The thing that I'm still trying to wrap my head around is how can it start to be proactive on the type of insights of problems? Because I think when we're pretty good at right now, I mean, like non-machines, is to look at specific patterns and ask the right questions and start asking people around the company or the AI to do a deep dive on specific topics because we have that questions and we kind of start asking the right questions for us. And so when is it going to be able to do that? It's tricky also as well because I'm thinking like the way I'm thinking about it, it's so different from one company to another. The way to operate is so different from one company to another. The way I will ask a question will be so different based on what's a team, how does
Does
it.
that make sense though? Like I always felt like when I was consulting for a bunch of different companies, and I'm sure you felt this too, where like things should not be as different as they are. Like, no, this is how we do this. I'm like, yeah, well, that's wrong. Or it's like, it's totally under optimized. Everyone should be doing this, this, and this. And this gets to like the broader question of like the financial workflows. It takes a
Yeah.
really long time, as you've experienced, to learn enough about the various functions inside an operational finance organization to be able to own all of it. And even if you don't have to do all of it, just to hire it, like to know enough about cash management and audit and like compliance and FP&A and accounting and taxes and again, the list goes on and corp
Yeah.
dev and like having to jump in and run CS and like HR, like my dad always ran HR and IT and like to build up that knowledge set to be able to run each one of those takes a really long time. I guess to what extent do you think that is like either can be massively accelerated and you could just put like any smart person and they'll just know what to do and learn it, or like that's still going to be defensible, that the person who's focused on it for a long time will own it and like will be the master. I don't know. I guess I'm just like riffing on this right now,
Yeah.
but
I'll say I think for me, there's two ways to look at it. One is like, is it an existing company, a pre-AI company, or is it a company that you start now? A company that you start now, I believe you can build almost like, this AI is almost like, a team member at this point, right?
yeah,
They have full context. I think you have your AI set up in most conversations, decision-making process. You can start logging every single decisions at the company. And so I think they can probably ramp up fairly quickly on all of that. When you have a company that have been around for a little bit, where it's hard for you to come up, as a new person that joins the company. But what you do is you start talking to people, right? You start to understand that. You start to understand what was done in the past, how the product works, the type of customer. You talk to a bunch of customers and all of that. And so there's still a little bit of things that are influencing your judgment over time in these, I would say, pre-AI companies that you still need to learn. And so I think that's for the set of context. Then the second thing is more like decision making is, I'm using AI all the time. And, when I used it this morning, I looked at some data and I've hey, there's some gaps on data because, I've been around the company for a while. And when you've been around companies for a while, you have this kind of nose for immediately when something is off, you just need to glance at numbers and you have a feel for it. And so that is, I think, something that is still tricky to build for the AI tool. And though I'm building a sub-agent auditor that's going to say, hey, every time you return me some data, pan this sub-agent auditor that's going to review and question if there's any gaps and all of that. But still, even with that, I think you can think from a logical standpoint, hey, why do you have a gap in this data? It can help you in there. But sometimes even the overall process is not that great. Yeah.
Yeah. If you can articulate the thought process that you're going through, where you say, I saw this and that together, or 3 or 4 things together, and that made me question something. And you teach that to the AI. And then you say, you do that a few times on different various compound anomalies, we'll call them. Can the AI discover a 5th one? That marginal one that you wouldn't have discovered? I always wonder about that because it's in the world of written word, AI, there's nothing new under the sun. It's pulling something from everything. I'll use something that I thought was an obscure reference in some thing I'm using to edit. And it'll be yeah, you're referencing this specific, and it's that's me for AI. But when it comes to deep compound inference, I guess it should be good at that too, right?
It should be good at it. I agree. I mean, the first step that you mentioned is definitely something that I do and most people should be doing. Every time there is an issue on something, I say, hey, let's fix it together. And I do explain my thought process and why I think there's a problem. And, now it has memory. We have an error log where every time there is an error, it will log it so that it can learn from it from the next time and make sure pretty much what you want to do is you don't want to fix the same thing over and over again, right? You want to fix it once and make sure it gets it. And
this is my
if you have a good system,
this is my entire ethos when I was in banking. I was I never want to do anything twice.
Exactly.
So I automated things that I should not have wasted time automating because I built templates because I was I don't want to have to do this again ever.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's an interesting approach.
Yeah, it is.
So I guess what I'd love to jump in on is a couple of things. The first is I'd love to hear about a couple of examples of workflows that you've automated inside the operation, which I think a lot of our listeners would appreciate hearing and learning from, because it's usually just mind expanding. But then the second piece, which I think frankly is more interesting, is how you've come upon them. How have you decided this is where I'm going to insert the tool? Because again, it's this in-between layer of how do I apply the tool, which humans, by the way, have been dealing with for a really long time, since humans existed.
Yeah.
How do we use the tools in the best way possible that are given to us? And how does that develop over time? I think the timelines have gotten quicker, the tools have gotten more powerful, but that is where a lot of value accrues, especially for smart people, frankly. What is the methodology in discovering the next use case for that tool?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So some of the key workflows, I have a ton of workflows.
I can imagine.
Okay, so maybe let's start with the genesis of it. The genesis of it for me was there is one thing that I'm not great at, and there is one thing I've wanted. The one thing that I'm not great at is I'm not the best at email management. So, I've never believed in zero inbox. You come open my inbox, people will be shocked because I have thousands of unread emails and all of that. I never missed an important email. I would just glance at them all the time, but it always felt for me just wasted time to just, classifying my emails. Every time I'm seeing people's zero inbox, I'm how do you guys do that? I'm not going to spend my time labeling everything, drag and dropping every single email. Even if you use tools like Superhuman and stuff like that, that can really accelerate the workflow. I still couldn't quite get to it. So that was one thing that I wasn't great at. And the second thing is I kept trying a bunch of like to-do list and tasks management tool. And I really wanted something that would auto update by following me daily, right? So there's a lot of ways that I'm getting tasks at the company that I need to do. So it's one, obviously it's like, okay, you have an idea, you want to log it as a task. Two, you're like in a meeting, we talk about stuff, and then you have a task from the meeting. Three, you receive an email. Four, like there's a bunch of Slack messages and that turns into tasks. So I just wanted to tackle these two things. I want an amazing task management system, and I also want to, get rid of the email management stuff that I'm not great at. So one of the first workflows that I had was plug my Gmail into Claude Code and have it review all my emails. So I have like what we call a cron jobs. It's just an automation that is checking my emails. I would say 3 to 4 times a day. It will list and I will receive a recap of that in Slack. So I have a Slack channel between me and Claude. And so it was my private Claude. And let's say at 9 a.m., it will check my emails. It will archive what needs to be archived. It will draft responses to all the emails that needs to be that I need to reply to. It will update my to-do list and figure out a bunch of tasks for me to do. So that's kind of how I started to do it. So that's kind of the genesis of it. And so just to email management and task management, because I had a bunch of those. After that, it expanded to everything. So, I have a bunch of like data requests and ad hoc requests at the company. We plugged BigQuery, a bunch of our data is in BigQuery, and now I can ask it to do anything. Let's say if I received a request from let's say an investor and say, hey, I want, the customer cube for ARR for your enterprise customers for the last 24 months. I can first, I don't even have to ask it to do it. I will most likely receive an email. The AI will see there's an email. It's going to be on my to-do list. And then I will say, hey, let's work on this. So it will capture the data, open, so do all the SQL queries, and then return the data. I have also the Excel MCP, or I can use Google Sheets or whatever. So it will create Excel docs automatically with all that request. So these are like the type of workflows I'm working on mostly. I have a lot of those. This morning, actually, at 6 a.m., I was finalizing 2 additional MCPs that I added. We use Zip as a procurement tool. So I do a fair amount of legal review at the company. And I was like, oh man, I wish I could just do everything from Claude. I barely want to log into a platform anymore. Like my OS is Claude. So a Claude Code on a terminal is my OS. So as I want to open as little software companies, tools that I want. So pretty much I want to open my terminal and I should be able to do the max amount of things there. And so I just connected Zip as read-only. So I think it's pretty important. Read-only. So now when I have a request, when I need to approve whatever procurement, it can go there, find all the agreements and review the agreements and then tell me what, if it's okay, not okay, according to some data rules that I give it. So I can do that. I can go on and on. I also have one that I like a lot about red lines on contracts.
So I'll abstract this a bit, because what I'm hearing is that your genesis in your first use case was like painkiller, right? Everyone talks about like vitamin versus painkiller. It's painkiller. It's like this thing that bothers me that I don't like. And so like, let me spend some time thinking about how do I remove this pain point from my life and how can AI do that for me? It seems like the second step was, here's some other stuff that like doesn't bother me that much, but it's time consuming. And how can I leverage the power of AI to collapse the repetitive tasks and just surface what I need? And in some cases, again, with like a query request of someone looking for a piece of information, like you can automate the whole workflow. And I think that most people they don't even have that framework of like, okay, let's go after the things that I don't like, that I'm not good at, that annoy me, that spike my cortisol, like whatever. Like when I look at my inbox, I have 2 inboxes, right? And it's just like, and people are like, oh, superhuman will make your inboxes go. I'm like, it will not review the legal contract in my inbox. It will not approve the PwC audit form that I need.
Exactly.
Yeah. These are like detailed things that I need to handle that require like approval and judgment and all these things. So that's one. The second thing, again, is the time consuming stuff where it's like, this is repetitive, or again, I'm feeling personally like super enabled by this because like I had a boss many years ago, a wonderful guy named Harry Weller, and he couldn't even sit through a meeting. He was 45 years old and he couldn't sit through a meeting. The ADHD was off the walls. But what I saw was a guy who was effectively the lead board member on 17 companies. You can't do that without being ADHD. Like that's a prerequisite for the job. And I saw how he was able to harness that. And unfortunately, Harry passed away almost 10 years ago. This guy would have taken over the world with AI, because what I find is like, I've got ideas like flying all the time, and I try to give myself the space to do that. And AI really like empowers
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
right? Where like, I just have a spark of an idea. I could throw it in, I'd be like, okay, you run with it while I do this other thing, and then bring it back to me. Or like, and I didn't give the second example before of what I did with this company. I did an exercise 11 years ago with a company, and then I did an exercise 2 weeks ago. I can explain that maybe after we finish this little
Okay.
part. But yeah, it's like, so I guess the next question is like, what's the next step, right? What are the things that, because I think emotionally we hang on to things that we enjoy doing, right? Like for many years, like I just enjoyed like updating my software comps in this 5 megabyte Excel file connected to Capital IQ. Like I just enjoy doing that and like resorting them and studying them and like being involved in it. I'm like, I don't want AI to do that for me. Like I need to like see it and enjoy it and update it and like add stuff and delete stuff and update the IPOs and da da. And I'm like, at a certain point, I just lost interest in doing that, but I don't need to do that anymore. But I enjoyed doing it for a long time. So I wouldn't have thought to get AI to do that. So I guess the question is like, probably the next step is, okay, we've got the pain points as one, we've got the time savers as two. Step three is the things that we enjoy doing that maybe we shouldn't be spending a lot of time doing, but like we just enjoy it. It's a dopamine hit, fine, because we're nerds or whatever. The next step after that, I think that's where there's a lot of really interesting stuff, which is that stuff we really physically didn't even think of being possible before. I guess, to what extent have you taken it there?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm fairly close. So first, like I'm at a point I don't hang on anything. So everything I'm using AI literally for 100% of my workflows.
Wow.
There is, it's very rare that I will do something without leveraging AI in some forms. And I think that's kind of the point of view right now. Like it's just a copilot, right? So I feel like I'm working with, as I said, like most of my workflows will start from the terminal.
So I have to ask, I just have to interrupt you and ask then, are you working less or are you accomplishing more or both?
I feel like I'm working more, definitely. Yeah, I think you start to unlock a bunch of projects that you wanted to do, right? And you never looked at it. So, especially when you're like at a startup, the amount of things you have on the back burner, and it doesn't mean these things are not important. That means sometimes they felt like too time consuming, or you need to leverage so many people to get there, or like you're missing that insight is massive. And so I think now you can do a ton of things at the company. And so it just went a massive accelerator. So you all can accomplish.
So a shout out to Cal Newport's book, Slow Productivity, which I am slowly working my way
Yeah.
through. If you haven't checked it out
No.
or any of Cal Newport's stuff, highly, highly recommend. Yeah, I'll leave it there. There's a lot of good stuff in Slow Productivity that I think, again, Cal Newport's a computer science professor. Nothing in there talks about how AI ties so well with slow productivity, because it allows us to be so uniquely and authentically human instead of being a cog in the machine. And the more we can kind of decog ourselves, I don't know what the right term is, and pass off so much of it to AI, it really opens up to us to do more interesting things that
Exactly.
are aspirational that there were blocks on before. So
No,
what
definitely.
what are some examples that you felt like, okay, now I've handled A, B, C, D, which were all pain points that were like, again, a lot of people that are in the VP of finance seat in startups are like, I cannot stay afloat. They're like, forget
Exactly.
automation. They're like, I haven't thought about that at all. I just need a procurement tool. Like, just tell me which procurement tool now. Like, we just, we need an AP tool. Okay, fine. Like, so,
Exactly. Yeah, I
so
mean,
again,
first, I mean, as you mentioned, I think it's really hard to stay afloat, and I think you use it for that. I think we have a team that's fairly lean, and everyone on the team is leveraging AI as much as we can. Yeah, for me, my job is to take as much as I can and have the biggest impact on the company, and AI is just a way for me to get there. So I'm definitely doing a lot of that. I think when you start to unlock, for me, like a lot of me spending a lot more time on key insights on the business. For example, this morning, where I spent a little bit of time on, something that I would have loved to do and I would have never done without AI is I did a pretty massive deep dive on retention cohorts for our customers. And so typically the thing that I always wanted to know is what are the segmentation by channel? What are the type of actions customers are doing in the product that are fairly well correlated with retention and high amount of retention? And that just uncovered, there's something I'm going to bring to the team, that there's a specific feature that we have. And when people are using that feature, what we thought was a plus, actually the retention of these customers is below average. So these are like the type of insights like I want to start bringing to the business.
Yeah.
I think when you're like in finance and you're like in this type of roles at a startup, you just have a curiosity that is, limitless curiosity. And I think that really allows me to get there and like start tapping into all the questions that I have in my mind. And so do a ton of exploration. So that is that. And again, we always, like, as you said, like trying to stay afloat. There's a bunch of things we're supposed to do that we're not doing. And I think AI just allowing us to, to just punch above our weight,
I think and we talked about this a little bit earlier. The thing that gets me more excited, frankly, than AI products is AI operations. Like as an investor, when I see a company going after some legacy industry and they're 4 people and the rest of their employees are just AI, like different AI tools, I'm like, they don't stand a chance. I mean, the incumbents like don't stand a chance.
Yeah.
And I wrote about this recently, what I call margin inversion, where it used to be that like gross margins were low and like OpEx was high. And so like the risk was high. And now it's like, well, why does gross margin need to be low? And is it really that low? And like, if you can crush OpEx, like now what wasn't an interesting business is now a really interesting business, but you can do it with 4 people instead of 80 people. And like, I know there's been a lot of talk about that. It's not that interesting, but I'll tell the kind of the other example now.
Mhm.
I'll give a couple entrees into it. When I started in investment banking, they put us in training and they had us do an exercise where we put together a whole like valuation deck on a company as a team of 4. And I'm pretty sure it took us longer to do it as a team of 4 than it would have taken any of each of us to do the whole thing ourselves. You lose so much efficiency in communication. And by the way, I'll quote Ben Gilbert from Acquired. He talked about lossy compression, and that's what a form of like talking and writing is. It's just lossy compression and trying to unpack and repack and rezip like
Yep.
it's playing telephone. So that's one. The second thing I experienced was like when I was at Morgan Stanley as a full-time analyst, after I finished training, I worked with some really talented people that could get in the room with founders and operators and really like understand the gist of like what made this company special. And this is why when I was there 2011 to 13, we like cleaned up the market. We did every IPO because we figured out how to get people excited about these technology companies. And that is an art. There's a woman I worked with named Marcy Vu, who is like one of the best in the world at this. I remember her physically writing on slides, like how to position Facebook, which again, in hindsight, be like, oh yeah, it's Facebook. There were huge questions on Facebook. And she was able to architect this. I mean, she did the same thing for Groupon. She did the same thing for LinkedIn twice, right? Like the list goes on and on. Zynga, like so many other companies, like what actually captures the value of what's going on? And then it runs through this nil up and down the chain of like Marcy up to like Michael Grimes and then down to Ali, who we worked with, and then me and Cindy. And like that was the workflow up and down and up and down. And every once in a while I had Michael Grimes over my shoulder helping run like in the weeds, like the Facebook valuation model that we invented. And it was like dozens and hundreds of hours of work of how do we position this company and every layer of like the communication back and forth into the company and everything. It's just like massively inefficient. Fine. Fast forward 3 years. I'm sitting at NEA. One of my partners says, hey, we got this company. They want some valuation work done. Who wants to do it? And I'm like, I love this stuff. Sign me up, right? I fly to Chicago. I sit with the founder. Turns out he already has a LOI for an inbound M&A. I'm like, maybe we should hire a banker. He's like, no, we got this. I put together a full like management presentation, came up with like the cleverest comp selection, used every trick in the book of discounted equity valuations and DCFs and comps and M&A and how do we do with some of the parts on these other companies and split out with just like the whole, kitchen sink of valuation methods of how this company's gonna be worth a lot. The CEO's, oh, this is great. This is great. See, I told you we don't need a banker. Like, I know where the company is. I can pitch it. You just give me the numbers and the math and we'll run with it. It took me like, I don't know, 15 hours to like do the first draft of that, which like if I was the analyst on it, it would have taken me like 200 hours,
Yeah.
just to get that, because it's so inefficient going up and down. Then I had this realization, which again, I did all of a sudden, it gave me the space to do Marcy's job, which is to have the revelation of like, this is why this is valuable. And for that company, I had realized that another company started doing their own sum of the parts publicly and disclosing one of their subsidiaries' financials, and all the equity research analysts started valuing that subsidiary. And that is what our technology actually could do for the acquiring company, was to build that. And now I'm like, okay, now we have a synergy model we can actually build based on, we can stand on firm ground. And yeah, I had like iterated another 12 hours on the deck and tuned all the numbers. And then that came into my mind. When the CEO saw that, he was like, this is going to make me a lot of money. We ended up selling the company for double what the initial LOI came in for. It's the single most valuable thing I've ever done in my career. I generated almost $1 billion of equity value by figuring this out. I doubled the M&A price. Fine. Fast forward to 2 weeks ago, I'm sitting with one of my portfolio companies, early stage company, still small. I don't know that much about their market. Like, I know it's like a big market. Great. There's a lot of potential, but it's also a slow sales cycle and fine. And
Yeah.
they've been talking to a company that's much bigger, been in the space for a long time. And I was like, we need to create that same magic. And so I did that entire exercise, which I just described, which at that point I'm at a point in my career where I can unpack what were the steps and what was the progression from that hyper inefficient, 4 of us doing the same low level job to like 4 of us doing a stack of jobs, which was also very inefficient, to me doing the whole thing, which was efficient, and then going to the CEO, to then me sitting on a Zoom live with the CEO, and in 45 minutes developing the same thing for this company, having the realization of this is the key. This is how we create that magical M&A dynamic that makes us so valuable to the acquirer. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I was like, I know that's what we need to figure out, that special moment. And I was able to create that. Again, it went from like, this mega inefficient exercise to like the day in, day out of being an investment banking analyst, which I would love to like, I kind of want to have an investment banking analyst on here now to be like, what's your day to day like compared to what mine was like?
Oh, yeah.
And then, because I caught like the worst moment in investment banking, I would argue, where we had all the data, but we didn't have any way to automate
But none of
using
the
it. Remember,
tools.
like
Yeah. All
Tableau
of the
would
data,
use
none of
like
the tools.
word
It's like
doc,
a ton of work.
massively inefficient. So my desire to automate everything was helpful. Then doing it quickly just with the CEO who had the vision, then doing it live in 45 minutes. So anyway, that's like my own experience. I guess as you look forward, and like things have obviously changed a lot in the last 6 months, we can kind of finish off here with like, what gets you excited? Where do you think the future, what's next on your list? What's the next thing that gets automated? What's the higher level thing? Like, where do we go from here? And I guess, what's your advice to other financial operators, most of whom are treading water, to get above that? Do you have I guess so. Well, 2 questions. What are the quick tips and tricks for financial operators that you would share? And what are you excited about that comes next?
Sure. Let's start with a quick tips. Tips that I have, I would say, I think you need to invest the time in building these systems, and you need to go through the initial hurdle of like, hey, it's faster for me to do it manually. Every time you set up a new system, there's a learning curve on that system. You need to prompt it really well. You need to write down pretty much a lot of process and documentation. I use Obsidian as whatever is a second brain. It's a bunch of like MD files, and in all my MD files, I have all my processes, and you need to spend the time. You don't need to write them down yourself. You can ask AI to do it, but you need to spend the time to set up your system. And it's going to feel painful at the beginning. At the beginning, you'll feel like, hey, I'm so busy and I'm working extra to set up that system. But yeah, I think you have to do it. And the second tip that I have is, do not try to fully automate fairly quickly. So initially, what you want to do is to leverage AI as much as you can, but you can use it as a one-type workflow. So let's say you don't want to say, hey, everything is automated. I'm not even looking at it every time, because it's going to break and you're going to lose confidence. You want to be sure that, you feel really comfortable about the output every time, that you have this sort of like learning loop and like, all the tweaks. And when you feel pretty good about something as an output, then start doing like full automation. Because I see so many people wanting to jump too quickly at the automation, and then like they get frustrated or it doesn't work as much because they did not refine the process. It's like a factory, right? You're not going to buy a machine to automate your whole kind of, assembly line if you haven't done it. If you don't have a sense of like what's the best or efficient way to do it or what great looks like, once you have that, then you start to kind of really build your assembly machine. So I think that's kind of the tip that I have. And I would say anything that does not require a high level of judgment, for me, as the first step, should be through some sort of AI workflows as much as I can. So every time I'm doing something, I'm asking myself, how can I better use AI for that? So I would say that's the tips. What excites me? There's a ton of things. I mean, first, just the ability to build is what I feel like is super exciting. There's no limit, right? And I think I've always been like, obviously like a finance person, but at heart, I'm like some sort of a generalist. I love, tweaking with product or, doing sales stuff or things like that. And I think the ability for like really high level generalists to do everything at the company and have massive impact, I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited about just the progression of the models. Over the last nearly 3 months, the progress of the models is just like, insane. Like I think, and seeing how this thing is going to be even like 3 to 6 months from now, I'm super excited about it. And the goal is to, again, more than a game, it's more like how can you help the company achieve its goal, right? And I think for me, it's helping me a lot when it comes to even like resource allocation. There's a bunch of software that I don't need to buy or like we're replacing with AI. But also I think it really helps us to kind of guide us making better decisions in terms of growth. And I'm really excited about the prospect of ubiquity around the company. So what I'm trying to do as much as I can is how can every single person at the company can use it and not just, the fringe, the one who's really into it, the nerd people. And I think if you get, as a small organization, a group of like 100 people or 150 people and everyone is using it the best way possible, that's where you really unlock productivity gains. And you go through your roadmap and X faster. You can ship better value to customers. You can extract better value also as well. You can be more efficient in your go-to-market process. You can serve your customers better. It's just like limitless possibilities when you start using it as a group and collectively. And these are like the things I'm really excited about like seeing that collective adoption and that impact at scale at the company.
Amazing. I'm wondering if there's anything else we should discuss today. This has been super, super interesting. I mean, I've enjoyed it. This stuff just gets me excited.
Okay.
And it's great to catch up as well. Hoping to come back to San Francisco soon. Yeah. Trying to think if there's anything else we should cover, or should we just wrap up? Is there anything else you want to share or throw out there?
Let's see. No, I think that's it.
Okay, cool. Well, Ibrahim, great to catch up. Great to see you. Thanks so much for joining and sharing what you've done. I think at least I've experienced some fear and that blockage, even though you mentioned it'll take longer to build the automation than it will to just do it manually, but then you'll be done. And like I said, I've always been that guy. I spent 3 hours doing something, so I would never have to do it again, even though it only taken an hour just to do it once. And by the way, sometimes I never had to do it again. Wasted 2 hours, but maybe it helped someone else down the road. Actually, I know for a fact sometimes it did when I was banking. But I think getting over that hump and finding, if there's one key thing there, it's like, how do you find and define what's that one piece of your workflow? Like, you got to think about it. Like, what's the one thing that I feel like AI should be good at this? And like, just put it there. And then you start building the blocks around that one step at a time. And you get comfortable with it and you repeat it, and that motion becomes what drives a ton of value. There's a lot to be excited about right now, I think.
It is. What a time.
Yeah, amazing. Well, great to see you, and thanks again.
Thank you. Talk soon. Bye.